Where are you? Oh my goodness, Facebook is giving me all kinds of grief. Last week, I know it was shut down big time on Monday, and here it is a week later. I had problems with it on Friday. I saw that it was down again for a period of time, and I'm not sure where it is right now, other than the clock is moving on my time on the internet. So let's give it a go. Live with Tony. Tony Dattino here. I am the founder, chairman of the United States National Memory Competition. We are fast approaching our 22nd event, and we continue to have such a great mix of people. We call these our stage events. And why do we call them our stage events? Well, a good number of years ago, got a phone call that I thought at the time was a joke, but it turned out to be a very serious and wonderful phone call from Mark Cuban, who was interested in having me meet with his executive producer for the HDNet television network. And as we got to meet with the HDNet television people, and they got to look at what we were doing in running a memory competition, at that time we would have people sit at tables, and we'd have 5 events, and we'd do them throughout a day, but it was all paper and pencil and people sitting at tables with a desk, and they would be writing it down. And so you would look out at people doing it, and their faces were interesting, but there was nothing verbal. It was all a matter of an event and people doing paper and pencil and then scoring it and coming back to it with their scores and seeing who won. And that was the day. But when Mark Cuban approached this and we got to work with his executive producer for the TV network, what they wanted to do was something obviously that would be what? Television friendly. So it got us to be more creative, and it got us to do a little bit more work in terms of how do we take a memory competition and make it interesting to an audience that would be watching it obviously on television. And so fast forward, it took us weeks of prepping, and how would we get people that we could put on television that would represent the event well and not embarrass themselves, the mental athletes that were in it. And so from it, we created 4 events that we call our stage events. And our stage events have grown over the time of 22 years in terms of how to make it more interesting for an audience, be it spectators that were present or spectators watching it on television. And so we've had a lot of wonderful feedback from people who have watched it on TV, who have seen it in person, and anyone that does is always walks away with amazement and saying, I never thought I could watch a memory competition and find it to be so intense, exciting, interesting, and also educational. So we've matured over the years on how do we bring in a level of competition that is also educational to people, but is also entertaining. And so people would want to watch it. And it was the Mark Cuban team that really helped us to pull together the 4 events that we will be doing on October 23rd. And so there is a history in that, and I'll share with you in today's broadcast a bit of the history. So Mark Cuban, the team, got it. So it caused us to say, if we want to take people and we want to put them on stage, how many would we want to have? And at that time in our first year, we said, you know what? Why don't we see if we could get 8 people, and we could control that in a way that for television it looked like we knew what we were doing. And so in the first year we did it, we had 8 finalists, so we put people through these paper and pencil drills in the morning from 8:30 until 12:30, and then we would manually score all of that. And so 8:30 to 12:30, and we would pick out the top 8 people and give them some lunch, and then after lunch, we would put them on stage. And we'd not put them in this head-to-head competition. And the first year we did that, we only had 3 events. We only wanted to have 3 events so that we could get that on television. It would be interesting to the TV audience, and we could take it from there. So the very first event we created, we said, okay, it would be words to remember. So we would put up this list of words. It started at a 200. It's now grown to 300. And we give the mental athletes 15 minutes to go off stage and remember as many of these 200 words as they could remember. And what made that interesting is many of them use a method we call the Lokai method. It's a method that's been around for years, but it's how do you remember things in an order, in words and or paragraphs of information. If you were trying to take a test and trying to absorb information, trying to do a verbal debate, we have found it's a great technique to do all those things. So off they went, but they moved their bodies. They'd be making motions. Sometimes people play the piano. Sometimes people are swimming. And it's amazing when you start to understand what they're doing in their brains and watching their movements. It's an education in itself. So anyway, we'd bring them back on stage and we'd have them go through these words. And then the first person gave the first word, and the second person gave the second word, and the third word, and we keep going down. And the first year we did that, we wanted to eliminate 2 people. Because we had 8, we wanted to knock it down to either 6 or 5. So we wanted to eliminate at least 2, and in our first year that we did that, we eliminated 2. We now look to eliminate 3. So over the years, we've added mental athletes to the stage, and we've also added the number of people that we want to eliminate in the first round. And I think based on where we are this year, we may be eliminating 3 or 4 people based on the number of finalists that actually are able to travel to Orlando safely and get on the stage that we've got for them. That will be live telecasting on the YouTube, USA Memory Championship YouTube channel. So we're going to be live broadcasting. We'll be getting that information soon, and we'll be sending that out on our website, notices to people. They can watch it live from home, safely, in their own environment, and watch a memory competition, which I think is going to be fabulously entertaining and just amazing for people to watch. So I'm excited about that. But there was our first year. So words to remember. The second thing we did was, one of the things I had learned through the competition is people always wanted to remember people's names. Okay, so how do we remember names? And then when they give us a phone number or an address, how do we remember the digits in their number? And the third thing was always, well, how can I remember something about them? Which became our list, our word list, the things to remember about a person you meet. And so I pulled together all of the skills that they would use in the morning, faces, lists, numbers, and I said, you know what, we'll create an event where you meet people at a party. And they tell you their name, and they give you maybe an address of where they may live, and a town, and maybe their hobbies. And so we created this game called the Tea Party, and 3 strikes, you're out of the party, because you don't remember all the people who are still in it. And so we made that our second event, and therefore we brought people out on stage that were guests at the tea party, and they would give out their phone numbers and their addresses, and none of this, they had to be real, by the way, so that nobody was calling anybody after the event. And so they would give their favorite foods and their pet and maybe their favorite car or where they like to travel, and maybe a favorite sports team. And so we've varied that over the years so that it made it interesting for the audience to meet these guests that were on a stage now that the whole audience could see, the whole TV audience could see, and people could play along with it. And then the mental athletes would get there, we allowed them to take notes, and we gave them some time to go study their notes, and then we would bring these people back in a different sequence, and they could then turn around and they could remember, okay, what was that person's name, and what was their phone number, and where were their favorite hobbies, and what was their pet's name. And the audience would play along with that as best as they could. But invariably, what would blow the audience away would be these mental athletes sitting on stage. And we had one year where they remembered all 5, that we had 5 people remembered everything they needed to remember about these people. So we didn't knock all the people out that we wanted to knock out. So we said, okay, we got to get more creative and come up with an extra event. But in any case, it was awesome, and it just blew the audience away. The TV folks just thought it was fantastic, and we called it our Tea Party. 3 strikes, you're out of the party. Well, we went to MIT for our 20th anniversary. We went to produce there at MIT, and they were like, okay, we also want to demonstrate how what you're doing here goes from short-term to long-term. And most people are fascinated by, how do I learn something in here that I can take from short-term to long-term memory? So we created our long-term memory event. And when we did that, we said what we needed to do was get mental athletes. We had to give them thousands of data bits, but 30 days to study it. So they could prove that I could take these data bits of information. So we talked about, the first time we did was the Football Hall of Fame, the Rock Hall of Fame, Academy Awards, and science. So we mixed it up with things that the audience would find fascinating and very interesting. And then the mental athletes had over 3,500 data bits in 30 days to remember as much. And we put them on stage, and we did put these questions up now on the screen, and the audience again could play. And so all they saw is, okay, these mental athletes had 30 days to study, got it, but now they're getting these questions, and they had to recall. It's like a sophisticated game of Jeopardy, except in this case, we gave them the answers, now we had the questions. So that was fabulous, and it just wowed the audience. You had 450 people at MIT in the audience that just were glued to their seats. They just didn't want to, how are these people doing this? This is amazing, 3,500 data bits, and we had high school kids in it, and adults in it, seniors, not seniors, excuse me, adults in it, and it was just awesome. And that got us down to 3 people, which has been one of our favorite events, which we call our double-decker bust. It's 2 decks of cards that you have 5 minutes to remember the order of the 2 decks of cards. And now you're in a head-to-head with the people on stage. Now we have 3 people left, first person, second person, third, head-to-head. And the person that remembers the last deck, that last card, is the winner. And again, I'd hold up the card so the audience could see what card was going to be called out. So the audience at home could say, this better be the card they call out. And that turned out to be a pie. How do people do that? We're going to use that at the casinos. You know, we go to Vegas, or we go to Atlantic City. How do they do that? And so the question became invariably, as each part of these events is, how do they do that? And so along comes our 22nd event, and the fortunate thing for us is that Michael Dattino has studied the skills and the techniques of 20 years of the USA Memory Championships, and he puts together an online course called Maximum Memory Mastery, which finally now gives us an online course that answers the question, how do they do that? And so it's got a series of modules that talk about how do you work the Roman. First, how does memory work? So what's the overall take of memory? Second of all, how do they remember lists of words? How do they remember digits of numbers? How do they remember a person's name and face? And how do you put that all together to become super learners? And that's the work that Michael Dattino has done over the last several years, since he has left his position at Disney to work on this as a full-time occupation. And he has just brought such a gift of skill to this, and how do you educate people so that anybody can do this if they choose to want to improve their memory. And that's our 22nd event. So are we excited about this? I'm darn excited about this. We're putting pieces together. I'm sorry to say it's taken over 20 years to do it, but each year another piece fits into the puzzle. And on my Wednesday broadcast, I'll talk about some of the things that are really going on now, that really get me super excited. That says 20 plus years later, maybe it's finally come into where people across the country